At 43, Marcelo had built his empire from the ground up, transforming a small regional airline into a major carrier through sheer determination and brilliant strategy. Yet tonight, fatigue settled deep in his bones after a marathon of meetings with potential investors. He adjusted his simple charcoal sweater, a favorite from a local boutique, rather than the designer labels many expected from someone of his status. Marcelo had learned early in life that true power rarely announced itself. His father, a janitor who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college, had taught him that lesson well. Your worth isn't in what you wear, son. It's in what you build. The pre-boarding announcement crackled over the speakers, and Marcelo allowed himself a small smile. In less than 6 hours, he'd be back home in San Francisco, where a glass of aged scotch and his penthouse view of the bay awaited. He joined the priority boarding line, ticket clutched loosely in his hand, watching as other first-class passengers, predominantly white executives in sharp suits, filed past the gate agent with barely a glance. When Marcelo stepped forward, something shifted in the air. The gate agent's perfunctory smile faltered slightly, her eyes scanning him with a particular intensity he'd grown accustomed to over the years. Still, he offered his usual warm smile as he presented his boarding pass. The aircraft's first-class cabin welcomed him with its familiar soft lighting and leather seats. Marcelo stored his briefcase in the overhead compartment and settled into 2A, already anticipating the peaceful solitude of the transcontinental flight. He just closed his eyes when a sharp voice cut through his moment of tranquility. "Excuse me, sir?" Marcelo opened his eyes to find Bethany, the flight attendant, hovering over him. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her lipstick a shade too bright against her pale skin. The badge on her uniform gleamed under the cabin lights, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'll need to see your boarding pass again," she said, her tone carrying that particular edge Marcelo had heard countless times before, the one that suggested he'd wandered somewhere he didn't belong. "Of course," he replied evenly, reaching for the ticket in his pocket. Years of similar encounters had taught him to keep his voice measured, his movements deliberate. As he handed over the boarding pass, he noticed other passengers watching the exchange with poorly concealed interest. Bethany examined the ticket with exaggerated thoroughness, turning it over as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. "This seat is reserved for our premium passengers," she said, emphasis heavy on premium. "I'm aware," Marcelo responded, maintaining his composure despite the familiar burn of indignation rising in his chest. "As you can see from the boarding pass, I'm in the correct seat." The situation escalated when William, the pilot, emerged from the cockpit. His captain's stripes caught the light as he approached, authority radiating from his rigid posture. "Is there a problem here, Bethany?" "I'm just confirming this gentleman's seating assignment," Bethany replied, the word gentleman carrying a subtle sneer. William's gaze swept over Marcelo, taking in his casual attire and dark skin with obvious disapproval. "Sir, if there's been some confusion about your seating assignment, we'd be happy to help you find your proper place." The implication hung heavy in the air. Proper place meant somewhere else, somewhere less visible, somewhere in the back. Marcelo felt decades of similar moments crystallize into a single, sharp point of clarity. He'd spent years building his success, creating opportunities, and reshaping an industry. Yet here he sat, being questioned about his right to occupy space he literally owned. "There's no confusion," Marcelo stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him legendary in boardrooms across tea. "Country. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." What happened next occurred so quickly it seemed surreal. Bethany's hand shot out, palm connecting with Marcelo's cheek in a sharp crack that echoed through the cabin. Before he could process the shock, William followed with a second blow, his signet ring leaving a stinging welt above Marcelo's eye. The cabin fell silent. Passengers stared, some with horror, others with the particular discomfort of those witnessing something they knew was wrong but lacked the courage to challenge. Marcelo touched his cheek, feeling the heat of the impact, and something inside him hardened into diamond-sharp resolve. He reached for his phone, his movements deliberate and controlled. The transformation was visible. Gone was the patient, accommodating businessman. In his place sat the owner of one of the largest airlines in the country, a man who had built his empire by turning moments of crisis into opportunities for fundamental change. As he dialed his executive team, Marcelo's mind was already racing ahead, mapping out the sequence of events that would follow. This wouldn't be handled with the usual corporate apology and sensitivity training. No, this moment demanded something more substantial, something that would reshape the very culture that had allowed such behavior to flourish. The phone connected, and Marcelo's voice carried the weight of absolute authority as he spoke. "This is Santos. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." The airport terminal buzzed with activity as Marcelo's team materialized with remarkable efficiency. His legal counsel, Sarah Chun, arrived first, her tablet already displaying preliminary incident reports. Behind her came Marcus Thompson, head of human resources, and Diana Rodriguez, chief operating officer. They formed a protective circle around Marcelo, their presence transforming the gate area into an impromptu command center. "I want full background checks on both employees," Marcelo instructed, his voice steady despite the angry red mark still visible on his cheek. "Every complaint, every incident report, every performance review. If they've so much as been late to a shift, I want to know about it." Diana was already coordinating with ground control. "The flight's been flagged for immediate review. We're holding departure until this is resolved." Through the terminal windows, Marcelo could see passengers being escorted back into the building, their confusion evident. Inside the plane, Bethany and William were being relieved of their duties, the reality of their situation finally beginning to dawn on their faces. "Sir," Sarah interjected, her tablet displaying a preliminary report, "we've already found 3 previous complaints against Bethany for discriminatory behavior, all quietly resolved by middle management. William has 2 similar incidents in his file." Marcelo's jaw tightened. The pattern was clear, a systemic failure that had allowed such behavior to persist unchecked. He thought of his father again, of the dignity with which he'd faced similar treatment throughout his life. "This ends today," he declared, his resolution absolute. The investigation moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Witness statements were collected from passengers who'd observed the incident, their shock at the physical assault evident in their testimonies. Security footage was retrieved, showing the entire interaction in stark detail. As the evidence mounted, Marcelo turned his attention to the broader implications. "I want a complete audit of our customer service policies," he instructed Marcus. "Every procedure, every training module, every incident report from the past 5 years. We're going to identify every crack in the system that allows this kind of behavior to slip through." The pressure within the airline's corporate structure was immediate and palpable. Regional managers scrambled to compile reports, knowing their own handling of previous incidents would now face scrutiny. Middle management, long accustomed to quietly resolving discrimination complaints to avoid negative publicity, suddenly found themselves under the microscope. The following days saw Marcelo's investigation expand like ripples in a pond, touching every corner of his airline's operations. His team had taken over a conference room at corporate headquarters, its walls covered with flowcharts and data points revealing a troubling pattern of normalized discrimination. Sarah Chun presented her findings with clinical precision. "We've uncovered 47 similar incidents in the past year alone," she reported, her laser pointer highlighting clusters of data. "Most were resolved with nominal compensation and confidentiality agreements. The pattern suggests a systematic approach to burying these issues rather than addressing them." Marcelo stood at the window, watching planes taxi across the tarmac below. Each aircraft bore his company's logo, a symbol he'd once associated with progress and innovation. Now he saw it through different eyes, wondering how many passengers had suffered indignities similar to his own. "The training programs are part of the problem," Marcus Thompson added, spreading out curriculum documents across the conference table. "They treat diversity and inclusion as checkbox items rather than fundamental principles. There's no real accountability built into the system." The evidence against Bethany and William had become overwhelming. Beyond the physical assault, their personnel files revealed a history of complaints that had been systematically downplayed or ignored. Their actions in first class that day weren't an anomaly. They were the predictable result of a culture that had prioritized expediency over justice. Witness testimonies painted a vivid picture of the incident. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing," one passenger had written. "They treated him like he was invisible, like his dignity didn't matter. When they struck him, the whole cabin froze. Nobody did anything. We were all complicit in our silence." As the investigation progressed, Marcello received regular updates on Bethany and William's mandatory sensitivity training. Initial reports indicated resistance, particularly from William, who maintained he had been following standard security protocols. The irony of this defense wasn't lost on Marcello. He'd written many of those protocols himself. The audit expanded beyond customer service to examine hiring practices, promotion patterns, and complaint resolution procedures. Each new revelation reinforced Marcello's determination to implement fundamental change. This wasn't just about punishing two employees who'd assaulted him. It was about dismantling the structures that had made such behavior possible in the first place. Diana Rodriguez coordinated with legal to draft new policies that would reshape the airline's approach to customer service and employee conduct. "We're building something unprecedented," she told Marcello during one late-night strategy session. "This could set a new standard for the entire industry." The pressure within the company continued to build as employees at all levels realized the magnitude of the coming changes. Some embraced the opportunity for reform, while others bristled at the implications. Marcello welcomed the tension. Real change, he knew, was never comfortable. The tension that permeated the company's corridors became a catalyst for unprecedented change. In the weeks following the incident, Marcello observed as departments that had operated in comfortable isolation for years were suddenly forced to confront their interconnected roles in perpetuating systemic biases. The discomfort was palpable, but so was the potential for transformation. Regional offices across the country reported similar patterns of discrimination that had gone unchallenged for years. In Atlanta, a review of customer complaints revealed a disturbing trend of RST class upgrades being mysteriously unavailable for passengers of color, even when seats remained empty. The Chicago hub had accumulated dozens of internal complaints about selective enforcement of dress codes and baggage policies. In Dallas, several senior flight attendants had developed an unofficial practice of scrutinizing certain passengers' boarding passes with excessive zeal. Marcello spent countless hours in video conferences with station managers, customer service supervisors, and regional directors. Some meetings stretched late into the night, the discussions intense and often uncomfortable. He listened as veteran employees defended long-standing practices, their justifications ranging from security concerns to maintaining standards. Each explanation revealed deeper layers of ingrained bias that would need to be addressed. The investigation into Bethany and William's behavior had opened a Pandora's box of institutional failures. Training records showed that the airline's diversity programs had been gradually diluted over the years, reduced to superficial presentations that emphasized legal compliance over genuine understanding. Employee feedback sessions, designed to identify potential issues, had become perfunctory exercises in checking boxes rather than meaningful dialogues. In the corporate cafeteria, conversations hushed when executives walked by. Middle managers huddled together during lunch breaks, sharing worried whispers about the scope of the coming changes. Some longtime employees, seeing the writing on the wall, began updating their resumes. Others, particularly younger staff members, approached Marcello's team privately to share their own experiences of witnessing discrimination but feeling powerless to address it. Diana Rodriguez's office became a hub of activity as she coordinated the development of new training protocols. She assembled a diverse team of consultants, including civil rights attorneys, cultural anthropologists, and experts in organizational psychology. Together, they began dismantling the airline's existing approach to customer service and rebuilding it from the ground up. "We're not just changing policies," Diana explained during one particularly intense strategy session. "We're changing the fundamental way our employees think about service, about dignity, about human worth. It's like rewiring the company's DNA." The physical assault Marcello had endured became a case study in the new training materials, though his name was initially withheld to ensure objective discussion. Employees were asked to analyze the incident from multiple perspectives, identifying the numerous points at which different choices could have led to different outcomes. The exercise proved particularly powerful when participants learned the victim's true identity. Sarah Chin's legal team worked tirelessly to review and revise every company policy that could potentially enable discriminatory behavior. Employee handbooks were rewritten, complaint procedures were streamlined, and accountability measures were strengthened. The goal was to create a system that would make discrimination not just punishable, but culturally unthinkable within the organization. Marcus Thompson focused on the human element of the transformation. He organized small group discussions where employees could share their own experiences with discrimination, either as witnesses or victims. These sessions often became emotional as people began to recognize patterns they had previously overlooked or dismissed. The shared stories created bonds of understanding that transcended departmental boundaries and hierarchical levels. The company's internal communication channels buzzed with updates about the ongoing changes. Some employees expressed skepticism about the scope and speed of the reforms, while others welcomed the opportunity to address long-standing issues. Marcelo made a point of responding personally to many of these messages, sharing Gia's vision for a company where dignity and respect were not just corporate values, but lived experiences for every employee and passenger. As word of the changes spread beyond the company, industry analysts began paying attention. Some praised the comprehensive approach to addressing discrimination, while others questioned whether such sweeping reforms might impact profitability. Marcelo remained unmoved by the external commentary, focused entirely on the internal transformation he knew was essential. The investigation into Bethany and Williams' actions continued to yield insights into the company's cultural blind spots. Their personnel files revealed a pattern of small incidents that, viewed individually, might seem minor, but collectively painted a picture of persistent bias. More troubling were the performance reviews that had actually praised their attention to security and maintenance of standards, euphemisms that had masked discriminatory behavior. Both employees were required to attend intensive one-on-one counseling sessions with diversity specialists. These weren't the typical corporate training sessions filled with PowerPoint presentations and role-playing exercises. Instead, they were deep dives into personal beliefs, unconscious biases, and the real-world impact of discriminatory actions. Bethany's initial defensiveness began to crack during her third session. The counselor had asked her to recall specific instances where she had questioned passengers' presence in first class. As she listed these incidents, a pattern emerged that she couldn't ignore. The realization that her actions had been guided by unconscious bias left her visibly shaken. Williams' journey toward understanding proved more challenging. His military background and years of authority as a pilot had reinforced certain attitudes about command and control. The physical assault he had participated in forced him to confront the dark side of that authority. How easily power could be misused, how quickly judgment could turn to violence. The ripple effects of the investigation touched every aspect of the airline's operations. Ground crews reported feeling more empowered to speak up when they witnessed questionable behavior. Gate agents began examining their own practices for hidden biases. Flight attendants started sharing stories of times they had intervened, or wished they had, when passengers faced discrimination. In the executive suite, Marcelo's team continued to push forward with reforms. They developed new metrics for measuring customer satisfaction that specifically tracked incidents of discrimination or bias. Anonymous reporting systems were enhanced to protect employees who spoke up about workplace issues. Training programs were redesigned to emphasize empathy and cultural awareness alongside technical skills. The company's board of directors, initially concerned about the cost and scope of the changes, began to see the potential long-term benefits. Market research showed that customers were paying attention to the airline's commitment to addressing discrimination. Bookings actually increased as news of the reform spread, particularly among minority and corporate clients who appreciated the company's proactive stance. Marcelo himself remained deeply involved in every aspect of the transformation. He regularly walked through terminals, talking with employees and passengers alike. These conversations provided valuable insights into how the changes were being received and implemented at the ground level. They also served as powerful reminders of why the reforms were necessary. Every story of past discrimination strengthened his resolve to create lasting change. The investigation that had begun with a single incident of discrimination had evolved into a comprehensive overhaul of corporate culture. What Bethany and William had failed to understand that day in first class was that they weren't just confronting a passenger. They were challenging the very foundations of dignity and respect that would soon reshape their entire industry. As the weeks turned into months, the transformation gained momentum. Each new policy, each training session, each revised procedure built upon the others, creating a framework for sustainable change. The discomfort of the early days began to give way to a sense of pride as employees at all levels recognized their role in building something unprecedented in the industry. The story of what happened in first class that day became part of the airline's institutional memory, not as a moment of shame, but as the catalyst for necessary change. Marcello's response to discrimination had set in motion a revolution in corporate accountability, one that would continue to influence the industry for years to come. The pressure that had initially created such tension within the company gradually transformed into a driving force for positive change. Employees who had once feared the scope of the reforms began to embrace their role in creating a more equitable workplace. The discomfort of confronting long-standing biases gave way to the satisfaction of addressing them openly and honestly. As employees began embracing their roles in fostering change, the transformation took on a life of its own. Break rooms that had once buzzed with nervous whispers now hosted earnest discussions about inclusion and accountability. Veterans of the industry who had initially dismissed the reforms as mere corporate window dressing found themselves engaged in meaningful dialogue with younger colleagues about their shared responsibility in creating a more equitable workplace. Bethany's journey through this period of change proved particularly revealing. The woman who had raised her hand against Marcello that fateful day now spent her evenings poring over materials from her sensitivity training, her dining room table covered with sticky notes and journal entries. Her initial defensiveness had crumbled in the face of overwhelming evidence of her own biases, leaving her grappling with uncomfortable truths about herself. One morning, while reviewing incident reports from her past flights, Bethany came across a complaint she had dismissed years ago. A Middle Eastern family had reported feeling targeted by her excessive scrutiny of their carry-on bags. At the time, she had justified her actions as standard security protocols. Now, reading their account with new eyes, she recognized the fear and humiliation her behavior had caused. "I used to think I was just doing my job," she confided to her counselor during a particularly intense session. "But looking back, I see how I wielded authority like a weapon, using it to make others feel small." That day, with Mr. Santos, I wasn't protecting anyone. I was asserting power I had no right to claim. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Tears welled up as she recalled countless similar incidents throughout her career, subtle discrimination she had either perpetrated or witnessed in silence. The weight of these accumulated moments pressed against her conscience, demanding acknowledgement and atonement. William's transformation, though slower, proved equally profound. His resistance began to crack during a simulation exercise where he was placed in scenarios mirroring discriminatory experiences. Playing the role of a passenger subjected to baseless suspicion and hostility forced him to confront the impact of his own actions. The turning point came during a group session where employees shared stories of discrimination they had faced. A young black pilot described being repeatedly mistaken for support staff, even while in uniform. His account of maintaining composure in the face of constant questioning of his credentials struck a chord with William, who recognized his own behavior in the skeptical faces the young man described. "I've spent my career believing authority demanded unquestioning respect," William admitted during a subsequent counseling session. "I never stopped to consider how that authority might be tainted by my own prejudices. When I struck Mr. Santos, I wasn't upholding standards. I was enforcing biases I hadn't even acknowledged I carried." The impact of these personal transformations rippled through the company. Other employees, seeing the genuine change in Bethany and William, began their own journeys of self-reflection. The training sessions that had once felt like mandatory obligations became forums for authentic dialogue and personal growth. Marcelo watched these developments with careful attention. He had insisted on regular updates about Bethany and William's progress, not out of a desire for retribution, but from a genuine interest in understanding how deeply ingrained attitudes could be transformed. Their journey from antagonists to advocates for change would become a powerful testament to the possibility of genuine reform. In the crew lounges, Bethany began sharing her story openly, using her own experience as a cautionary tale and a pathway to understanding. She spoke about the moment she raised her hand against Marcelo, describing it as the culmination of years of unchecked biases and misused authority. Her vulnerability in acknowledging her failures made her message particularly impactful among colleagues who recognized their own potential for similar mistakes. William, drawing on his position of respect among the pilot corps, took on a different but equally important role. He began incorporating discussions about bias and authority into his pre-flight briefings, encouraging crews to consider how their actions might be influenced by unconscious prejudices. His willingness to acknowledge his own failings gave others permission to examine their behavior more honestly. The airline's training center became a hub of innovation in addressing discrimination. New simulation scenarios were developed, incorporating real incidents from the company's history, including, with Marcelo's permission, the confrontation that had sparked the current reforms. These exercises forced participants to confront challenging situations from multiple perspectives, breaking down the emotional and psychological barriers that often protected discriminatory behavior. Diana Rodriguez's team documented these transformations meticulously, creating case studies that would inform future training programs across the industry. The personal journeys of Bethany and William became powerful examples of how deeply rooted attitudes could be changed through a combination of accountability, education, and genuine commitment to growth. The physical and emotional scars of that day in first class had long since faded, but its impact continued to reshape the airline's culture. Marcelo's response to discrimination, firm yet focused on transformation rather than punishment, had created a model for addressing systemic bias that other organizations began to study and emulate. In quiet moments, Bethany sometimes found herself reflecting on the person she had been before the incident. The memory of her raised hand brought shame, but also gratitude for the wake-up call it had provided. She had learned that true strength lay not in asserting authority, but in acknowledging mistakes and working to correct them. William, too, carried the memory of that day as both a burden and a catalyst for change. His role as a leader had been forever altered by the recognition of how power could corrupt judgment. The lessons he had learned about authority, respect, and dignity now informed every interaction with his crew and passengers. The pressure that had initially created such tension within the company had indeed transformed into a driving force for positive change. But this transformation went far beyond mere policy updates or training programs. It had touched the human core of the organization, challenging each individual to confront their own capacity or both discrimination and growth. As the reforms continued to take root, the airline began to attract attention from civil rights organizations and industry leaders interested in replicating its success. Marcelo found himself increasingly called upon to share the story of how a moment of discrimination had sparked a revolution in corporate culture. Yet he always emphasized that the real story lay not in the incident itself, but in the thousands of individual transformations it had inspired. The company's commitment to addressing discrimination had evolved from a response to crisis into a fundamental aspect of its identity. Employee surveys showed increasing levels of job satisfaction and engagement, while customer feedback reflected a growing reputation for genuine inclusivity and respect. The positive feedback and growing reputation for inclusivity became more than just statistics on quarterly reports. It manifested in countless daily interactions throughout the airline's network. Gate agents began noticing passengers specifically choosing their flights because of the company's stance on discrimination. Corporate clients adjusted their travel policies to prioritize partnerships with airlines that demonstrated similar commitments to equality. In Terminal 4 at JFK, Where Marcelo's confrontation with Bethany and William had occurred, a subtle but significant change had taken place. The same gate where discrimination had once flared into violence now served as a model for the airline's transformed culture. New employees were trained there specifically, the location serving as both a reminder of past failures and a testament to the possibility of change. The airline's training center expanded its programs to include regular sessions with civil rights leaders, psychologists, and experts in organizational behavior. These workshops went beyond traditional diversity training, diving deep into the psychological and social factors that contributed to discriminatory behavior. Employees learned to recognize not just obvious bias, but the subtle ways prejudice could influence decision-making and customer interactions. Bethany's transformation continued to evolve in unexpected ways. She began volunteering to lead orientation sessions for new flight attendants, sharing her story with unflinching honesty. "I was the perfect example of how power can blind us," she would tell them, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "I thought I was protecting standards, but I was really just protecting my own prejudices." Her candor made these sessions particularly powerful. New hires watched as she described the moment she struck Marcelo, her voice catching as she recalled the look of dignified resolve on his face. "That moment could have ended my career," she would explain. "Instead, it began my education." William's influence spread through the pilot corps like ripples in a pond. His pre-flight briefings became known for their emphasis on emotional intelligence alongside technical proficiency. He developed a reputation for asking challenging questions that forced his colleagues to examine their own biases. "Authority without empathy is just power waiting to be abused," became his signature phrase, one that eventually found its way into the airline's training materials. The impact of these changes began to show in unexpected ways. Customer service metrics improved across all demographics, not just among minority passengers. Employee retention rates increased, particularly among diverse staff members who reported feeling more valued and respected in their roles. Even on-time performance saw improvement, as better communication and mutual respect led to more efficient operations. Marcelo's leadership style during this period became a case study in corporate transformation. He maintained a delicate balance between holding people accountable for past behavior and creating opportunities for genuine change. His approach challenged traditional notions of corporate discipline, suggesting that true reform required more than just punitive measures. In the crew lounges, conversations about race, privilege, and power that had once been taboo became commonplace. Veterans of the industry found themselves learning from younger colleagues who brought fresh perspectives on inclusion and equality. The hierarchical barriers that had once separated different employee groups began to dissolve, replaced by a shared commitment to maintaining the airline's new standards. The company's internal communication platforms buzzed with stories of positive change. A gate agent in Chicago shared how she had intervened when a colleague began showing signs of bias toward a group of passengers. A baggage handler in Los Angeles described how the new training had helped him recognize and address his own prejudices. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of transformation. Other airlines began sending observers to study the company's training programs. Industry conferences requested presentations on the reforms. Marcelo found himself increasingly called upon to share the story of how a personal confrontation with discrimination had catalyzed industry-wide change. He always made a point of crediting the thousands of employees who had embraced the opportunity for transformation. The pressure that had once created tension had indeed become a force for positive change, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. Instead, it had evolved into a different kind of pressure, the weight of responsibility that came with being an industry leader in addressing discrimination. Employees felt it in their daily interactions, knowing their behavior could either reinforce or undermine the airline's commitment to equality. Bethany and William's stories became part of the airline's institutional memory, not as cautionary tales of failure, but as examples of how confronting one's own biases could lead to meaningful growth. Their journey from perpetrators of discrimination to advocates for change inspired others to examine their own attitudes and behaviors more honestly. The company's training center developed new programs specifically focused on the psychology of authority and its potential for abuse. These sessions explored how power dynamics could influence behavior, using real-world examples to illustrate how easily authority could be misused when unchecked by empathy and awareness. Marcelo occasionally visited the training center, sitting quietly in the back of the room during sessions. He watched as new employees grappled with challenging scenarios, their discussions reflecting a depth of understanding that would have been unimaginable before the reforms. These moments reminded him that true change required constant vigilance and commitment. The airline's approach to customer service underwent a fundamental shift. Rather than treating every passenger interaction as a potential security concern, employees were trained to begin from a position of respect and dignity. This didn't mean compromising safety. Rather, it meant recognizing that security and respect weren't mutually exclusive. Industry analysts who had initially questioned the business impact of such comprehensive reforms began publishing studies on the financial benefits of creating an inclusive corporate culture. The airline stock price reflected growing investor confidence in its approach, while customer satisfaction scores reached record highs. The transformation that had begun with a moment of discrimination in first class had evolved into a movement that reached far beyond the airline industry. Other corporations began studying the company's approach to addressing bias, recognizing that traditional diversity training often fell short of creating lasting change. In quiet moments between flights, Bethany sometimes found herself standing at the gate where the confrontation had occurred. The memory no longer filled her with shame, but with a deep appreciation for the opportunity she had been given to learn and grow. Her journey from that moment of violence to her current role as an advocate for change served as a powerful reminder that transformation was always possible. Williams' leadership among the pilot corps took on new dimensions as he worked to ensure the lessons of the past weren't forgotten. He developed a mentoring program specifically focused on helping minority pilots navigate the unique challenges they faced in the industry. His commitment to creating a more inclusive environment helped break down barriers that had long limited diversity in the cockpit. The pressure that had transformed the company continued to evolve, creating new opportunities for growth and learning. Each day brought fresh challenges and chances to demonstrate the airline's commitment to equality. The story of Marcelo Santos and the changes his experience had sparked became more than just a corporate narrative. It became a blueprint for how organizations could address systemic discrimination and create lasting change. The legacy of that day in first class would continue to influence the airline industry for years to come, not just through policies and procedures, but through the thousands of individual transformations it had inspired. The pressure that had once created tension had indeed become a force for positive change, driving the industry toward a future where dignity and respect were truly universal values. The transformation of pressure into positive change continued to evolve in ways that surprised even Marcelo himself. 5 years after the incident, the airline had become known not just for its operational excellence, but as a beacon of progressive corporate culture. The universal values of dignity and respect that had emerged from that confrontation in first class had taken root so deeply that they influenced every aspect of the company's operations. At the annual airline industry conference in Dubai, Marcelo found himself addressing a packed auditorium of industry leaders. His speech wasn't about profit margins or market share, but about the fundamental transformation of corporate culture. As he spoke, he could see Bethany and Williams sitting in the front row, now key players in the company's ongoing evolution. True change, Marcelo told the assembled executives, isn't measured in quarters or fiscal years. It's measured in the daily interactions that define our corporate culture. It's reflected in the way we handle moments of tension, in the decisions we make when no one is watching, and in the courage we show when confronting our own biases. The conference marked a turning point in the industry's approach to discrimination. Airlines from across the globe began sending their senior management teams to study the transformative programs that had emerged from Marcelo's experience. What had started as one company's response to a crisis had evolved into a movement that was reshaping the entire aviation sector. Bethany's role had evolved far beyond her original position as a flight attendant. She now headed the airline's newly created Center for Inclusive Excellence, a training facility that combined traditional service skills with deep emotional intelligence and cultural awareness. Her personal journey from perpetrator to advocate had given her unique insights into the psychology of discrimination and the path to redemption. Every time I share my story, she told a group of international airline executives, I'm reminded that change is possible, but it requires absolute honesty about our failures and unwavering commitment to growth. The hand I raised against Mr. Santos could have ended my career. Instead, it began a journey that would transform not just my life, but our entire industry. William's influence had spread beyond the cockpit as well. His program for mentoring minority pilots had expanded into a comprehensive initiative that addressed systemic barriers throughout the aviation industry. Under his guidance, the airline had achieved the highest diversity rates in its leadership positions, setting new standards for inclusion in an historically homogeneous industry. The pressure that had once created tension now manifested in a different way, as a driving force for innovation in addressing discrimination. The airline's training programs continued to evolve, incorporating new technologies and methodologies. Virtual reality simulations allowed employees to experience discriminatory situations from multiple perspectives, while artificial intelligence tools helped identify patterns of bias in customer service interactions. Marcelo's personal involvement remained steady but subtle. He preferred to let others tell their stories of transformation, understanding that the power of change came not from top-down mandates, but from individual journeys of growth and understanding. However, his presence at key moments served as a reminder of the incident that had catalyzed these changes. The company's annual Dignity and Respect Symposium became a major industry event, drawing participants from airlines around the world. Sessions ranged from practical workshops on handling difficult situations to deep discussions about the psychology of bias and the nature of institutional change. The symposium always concluded with a panel featuring Bethany and William, their stories serving as both warning and inspiration. The impact of these changes reached far beyond the airline industry. Corporate leaders from diverse sectors began studying the airline's approach to transformation. Management schools added case studies about the incident and its aftermath to their curricula. Civil rights organizations pointed to the airline's reforms as a model for addressing systemic discrimination in corporate settings. In the terminals and crew lounges where the airline operated, the culture had shifted so dramatically that new employees often found it hard to believe the stories of past discrimination. The company's commitment to equality had become so ingrained that it attracted a new generation of workers who saw aviation not just as a career, but as a platform for social change. Bethany's training center became known for its innovative approaches to addressing bias. One particularly effective exercise involved having participants reconstruct the events of that fateful day in first class, but with roles reversed. The impact of experiencing the situation from different perspectives often led to profound realizations about power, privilege, and prejudice. Williams' mentoring program expanded to include partnerships with schools in underserved communities, creating pathways for young people who had never considered aviation as a career option. The program's success in diversifying the pilot corps led to similar initiatives across the industry, gradually changing the face of commercial aviation. The pressure that had transformed the company continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Each new challenge became an opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of the airline's approach to inclusion and respect. When other companies faced their own discrimination crises, they often turned to Marcelo's airline for guidance on creating meaningful change. Regular surveys of employee satisfaction revealed that the transformation had created a more engaged and committed workforce. Staff turnover rates dropped significantly, particularly among minority employees who reported feeling valued and respected in their roles. The airline's reputation as an employer of choice attracted top talent from across the industry. The company's training materials underwent constant revision, incorporating new insights and experiences. The story of Marcelo's confrontation with Bethany and William remained a central case study, but it was now accompanied by hundreds of other examples of how the airline's transformed culture had prevented similar incidents or addressed them effectively when they occurred. Industry publications regularly featured articles about the airline's ongoing evolution. What had begun as a response to a crisis had become a model for corporate transformation. The pressure that had once created tension had indeed become a force for positive change. But it was a force that required constant attention and renewal. Marcelo often reflected on the journey from that day, in first class to the present. The physical confrontation had lasted only moments, but its impact continued to ripple through the industry. The pressure that had transformed his company had become something larger, a movement toward universal values that transcended corporate boundaries and transformed lives. In crew lounges and boardrooms, in training sessions and customer service interactions, the legacy of that transformation continued to grow. The pressure that had once created tension had indeed become a force for positive change, driving not just one airline, but an entire industry toward a future where dignity and respect were truly universal values, lived and experienced by every employee and passenger who passed through their terminals. As the years passed, the story of what happened that day in first class became more than just a cautionary tale or a catalyst for change. It became a testament to the possibility of transformation, both personal and institutional. The pressure that had once threatened to tear the company apart had instead forged it into something stronger, more resilient, and more deeply committed to the values of human dignity and respect.